I will read the translation once again for a reference. Maharaj Yudhishthira said, O best of the saints among the demigods, O best of spiritual leaders, how did Hiranyakashipu give so much trouble to Prahlad Maharaj, the pure and exalted saint, although Prahlad Maharaj was his own son? I wish to know about this subject from you. Hare Krishna. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share from Srimad Bhagavatam. This is a very wonderful canto, Canto 7. And of course, all cantos are wonderful. Srila Prabhupada said we should study from the first verse of the first canto to the last verse of the 12th canto. And so this section, as we've been reading, is about how Hiranyakashipu terrorized the universe. And as he was terrorizing the universe, he also continued to terrorize his son. So in the previous verses, the narration goes where it is discussed that Hiranyakashipu actually tortured his own son. So the previous text, just for context, Narada Muni is telling Yudhishthira Maharaj, my dear King Yudhishthira, the demon Hiranyakashipu tormented this exalted, fortunate devotee, although Prahlad was his own son. And in the previous verses, we read about the exalted qualities of Prahlad Maharaj, how he was such a wonderful personality and so on. So we read all the qualities of a great devotee. For several days, we've been reading about the specific qualities of an exalted devotee, such as Prahlad Maharaj. So when Narada Muni mentioned that Hiranyakashipu tormented that very boy who was such an exalted personality, then Yudhishthira Maharaj is actually quite astonished. He's very astonished for two reasons. That typically, and if you remember, one of the qualities of Prahlad Maharaj was discussed as Ajata Shatrava, when he doesn't have a person who doesn't have any enemies. So if a person does not have enemies, then how can somebody be so cruel to be able to torment such a person who is completely faultless, completely sinless, has no envy, and such a person, even a wicked person, would leave alone. If they don't appreciate them, at the very minimum, they will leave them alone. So Yudhishthira Maharaj was surprised that even such an exalted personality as Prahlad Maharaj was tormented by his father. And then the second point of being surprised was that Hiranyakashipu was his own son. And Srila Prabhupada mentions in other parts of the purports and other verses where a ferocious animal like a tiger or a lion are still very affectionate to their own children. So you may see that a wild animal like a tiger or a lion very viciously attacks a deer or some other prey, animal of prey, and consumes them. But even such a vicious animal is very, very affectionate to their own offspring. And Srila Prabhupada mentions this many times in his purports as well, that when a cat holds a mouse in its mouth, it's a sign of death for the mouse. When the same cat holds its kittens in its mouth, the kittens feel protection. When the mother cat transports a kitten from one place to the other, she picks the kitten up with her mouth. But that grip of that kitten in the mouth of the mother cat does not put fear in the minds of the kitten. They feel protection. In the same way, even a wicked person, although they may be wicked to everybody else in the world, are typically very, very kind to their own children because of bodily consciousness, and they identify their children as an extension of themselves. So although they're by general very envious and cruel, because they identify with the body and they very strongly identify their offspring with themselves, they're very kind to their offspring. But in this case, you saw that Hiranyakashipu was not kind to his son, but he was actually quite cruel. So this gave Maharaj Yudhishthira a cause for astonishment, and he was asking Narada Muni that how did Hiranyakashipu give so much trouble to Prahlad Maharaj? And that was his question. And Srila Prabhupada actually focuses on a few points in the purport that I would like to touch on. And he doesn't mention this in the specific order, but that's what he's actually saying in the purport, if you read the purport. The question is really around who's the right person that we can take instruction from, right? So the question is, and Srila Prabhupada says, to know about the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the characteristics of his pure devotee, one must inquire from authorities like Devrishi Narada. One cannot inquire about transcendental subjects from a layman. So Srila Prabhupada is touching on this point of who should we inquire from? And there are related questions around that. That who should we inquire from? And that's very clearly mentioned in the purport. That one should inquire from a bona fide spiritual master. Srila Prabhupada uses that phrase, bona fide spiritual master, over and over again. And all of us as practicing devotees, sadhakas, we understand this point really well. That we have all taken shelter of a spiritual master and following to the best of our ability the instructions of the spiritual master. So we understand this point. And at least in theory, we understand it very well, that the process of devotional service begins by taking shelter of a bona fide spiritual master. But there are a few other questions that are around this topic, right? That even after we take shelter, sometimes there's questions that why did we take shelter? Or somebody who is yet aspiring to take shelter might inquire, why should one take shelter? Who you take shelter from is the second question. The first question is, why should you even take shelter? And then the question after that is, well, how do you do this? How do you inquire from a spiritual master? What is the process? And then the next question is, if you know how to inquire, the question is, what do you inquire about? What do you ask? What kind of questions do you ask? And then finally, it's not just about gathering information. It's about how do we apply that knowledge in our lives. So just collecting information and getting answers to questions alone is not sufficient. One has to then be able to sincerely apply that knowledge in our life. So all these questions are things that are in a nuanced way brought out in the purport of Srila Prabhupada, that not only should we know who to inquire from, but we should also know what to inquire, and then how to accept that answer or information that we've been provided, and how to apply that in our lives. And only when we do all of these things do we get spiritual progress. So Srila Prabhupada mentions in many parts of the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita purports as well that getting a spiritual master is not like a fashion. It's not like, yes, everybody's doing it, so I should do it as well. And the spiritual master gave me another name, so I'm so and so das, and so I have an identity. So I'm part of the club now. I'm part of the inside group. Well, that's fine, but then the question is, that's not the objective of getting initiation. The objective of getting initiation is to be able to sincerely follow the teachings of the spiritual master that's coming down in parampara. So I'll maybe make a few remarks on some of these points, and then we can discuss any additional questions or thoughts anybody else has. And I also wanted to touch on this verse that Srila Prabhupada quotes in the purport. And this is again in the teachings of Kapila Dev to his mother Devahuti. And in this section of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada quotes quite a bit from the teachings of Kapila Dev. And it's a very beautiful section, actually. The whole section of the teachings of Kapila Dev is extremely, extremely beautiful. Very, very beautiful description of the form of the Lord, and so many other things that are there in that section of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And it is also philosophically the most complex part of Srimad Bhagavatam, the teachings of Kapila Dev. Those 5-6 chapters are extremely power packed, and it takes a lot of unpacking. So Srila Prabhupada, since he quotes this verse, I thought I'd just read the verse and the full purport and the full translation as well, so we can appreciate the depth of this verse. And this verse is 3:25-25. This verse goes like this: Satam prasanga mama virya samvido bhavanti hritkarna rasayana kathaha tajjoshanada shvapavarga vartmani Shraddha Ratir Bhaktir Anukramishyati. And translation by Srila Prabhupada to that verse is, in association of pure devotees, discussion of the pastimes and activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is very pleasing and satisfying to the ear and the heart. By cultivation of such knowledge, one gradually becomes advanced on the path of liberation, and therefore he is freed, and his attraction becomes fixed. Then real devotion and devotional service begin. So this verse is so amazing. Actually, it says that only after we are fixed in our bhakti, in our attraction to the Lord, does real devotional service begin. So it makes me wonder that we still, at least I can speak for myself, that's still very much practicing sadhaka, trying to chant the holy name sincerely. And so I cannot claim to be fixed in my attraction to the Lord. So in one sense, my devotional service has not even begun. And that actually is a wake-up call, right? That we feel that we've been practicing devotees for many, many years, some of us for many decades. And then we start reading this verse and we realize that there's still a long way to go, because we still have to fix ourselves in our attraction to the Lord. And then devotional service can begin. So touching on the points in the purport, it's very clear who we should surrender to. And as practicing devotees, we've surrendered to our spiritual masters, and we're trying to practice as best we can. But the question is why? Why should we surrender? And the answer is in the purport. Srila Prabhupada says that only a spiritual master can actually give you the answers to the real questions of transcendental subject matters. There's a verse in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, all of you, I'm sure, know this verse. It's in the fourth chapter. It says, Tad vidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshina. It says, Tad vidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya. One should approach a bona fide spiritual master and render submissive service and inquire from them submissively. And that spiritual master will give us information about the absolute truth, because they have seen the truth. Upadekshanti te jnanam. Upadekshanti means they will teach us. Te jnanam, that knowledge. Jnaninas, those people who possess that knowledge, because they are tattvadarshi. Darshi means one who has seen, and tattva means that absolute truth. So, and that goes for any subject matter, right? If you want to study, if you want to learn how to do mathematics, if that's your interest, then you can only approach a person who knows mathematics. If you approach a person who has no understanding of mathematics, they cannot teach you mathematics. If you want to play the violin, then the person who knows how to play the violin can teach you how to play the violin. A person who has no understanding how to play the violin, not even know how to hold it, cannot teach you how to play the violin. So similarly, if one is interested in hearing transcendental subject matters about who am I, who's God, how should I connect with God, what is the process I should follow, only a person who is experienced in that subject matter can teach us. And so Srila Prabhupada emphasizes that one cannot inquire about transcendental subject matters from a layman. So why we surrender to a supreme spiritual master is very clear. That only a bona fide spiritual master can actually show us the path of how we can connect with Krishna and perfect our lives. And the question of why we should surrender also is, as we get more and more experience in spiritual life, it actually becomes more clear. We hear about, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 8th chapter, he defines the material world with two words. Dukhalayam ashashvatam. Alaya means home or abode, and dukha means misery. So dukhalayam means an abode of misery, and shashvata means eternal. Ashashvata means not eternal or temporary. So Lord Shri Krishna says that this material world is temporary and full of misery, an abode of misery. That is the advertisement for the material world. There's no false advertising here. Krishna is very clearly telling us that this material world is full of misery and temporary. So as we become more experienced in spiritual life, we actually experience this fact. We understand this fact. Until we are serious about spiritual life, we still think they can maybe squeeze some juice out of this material world. Yeah. My last attempt was unsuccessful, and I was facing misery instead of happiness. So maybe my next attempt will be successful. I opened one door and there was misery. Maybe I opened the wrong door. So maybe I can open the next door, and I'm going to find great amount of happiness and permanent bliss. And that also gives us misery. But then we open the third door and we keep going. Most materialists are never satisfied. They keep opening doors and they keep getting misery, and then they keep opening the next door. And not only that, but they also train the next generation that, my son, I didn't get any pleasure by opening these doors, but I'm sure I'm opening the wrong doors. So you should continue the same tradition and try to open more doors and get happiness. So this cycle continues. But Krishna is very clear. He says this is dukhalayam ashashvatam. And as we become more experienced in spiritual life, we start becoming more serious in our spiritual life. Then this fact that this is a dukhalayam ashashvatam world becomes more and more apparent to us. Not only theoretically, but practically we realize. And we stop trying this endeavor of trying to just find pleasure in this material world. And then we turn to what can give us pleasure. The idea of seeking pleasure is not wrong, because that's the eternal nature of the soul. But where to seek it is the problem. That's where people get confused. And the Srimad Bhagavatam in the first canto, second chapter, fifth verse says, Savai pumsam paro dharmo ito bhakti radokshaje ahituki apratihada hiyatma suprasidati. The gist of this verse is that the highest dharma of a living entity is to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead without interruption and without motivation. And that is the only thing that can give pleasure to the heart. So it's not wrong to seek pleasure. It's just a question of understanding where and how. And a spiritual master can actually show us that. And the verse in the Gita, the fourth chapter verse, Tadvadi Pranipatena, also mentions how we can inquire. By rendering submissive service and inquiring submissively with the objective of learning and applying. I'm reminded of this incident that Srila Prabhupada was at Howard University and he was giving a talk. And so there was this person who was a young man who was in the mood of challenging Srila Prabhupada. He got up and asked Srila Prabhupada the question. He asked him something like, what is the significance? Why do you have a shaved head, and why do you have this yellow mark on your forehead? Why do you have this? And this gentleman was wearing a tie and a suit jacket, and so Srila Prabhupada asked him, what is the purpose of this cloth that you've tied around your neck? And the man was taken aback. He wasn't expecting this kind of a question. And when you think about it practically, there's no practical use for that tie. So when people wear ties, it's a formality. People wear it, but there's no practical application for it. It doesn't keep you warm. It's quite uncomfortable, actually. It just I've worn a lot of ties in my life, so I know it's not the most comfortable thing. It actually is quite tight around your neck, and it's not the most comfortable thing. So people wear it because that's what you're expected to do in a formal setting, but it's not the most comfortable attire. So that person was taken aback. He didn't realize that he was wearing this tie, but it was not really serving any practical purpose. And then Srila Prabhupada paused and said, when you have an opportunity to ask a spiritual person a question, you should ask relevant questions. And the instruction from Srila Prabhupada was that the opportunity to meet a highly realized spiritual soul is very rare. When we get that opportunity, we should utilize the opportunity to benefit ourselves spiritually. And if you have the opportunity to ask questions, we should ask questions that are relevant to our spiritual progress. So those are some points on this verse. And finally, just like when you go to a physician, if somebody has a health condition, you go to the physician and the physician examines you and prescribes medication. and you go to the pharmacy, get that medication. The whole objective of that exercise is to take the medication. It's not enough to meet the physician. That doesn't cure you. It's not enough to hear from the physician. That doesn't cure you. It's not enough to go to the pharmacy and pick up the medicine. That doesn't cure you. What actually will cure you is taking the medication according to the prescription of the physician. The physician says this medicine has to be taken 2 pills 3 times a day for 5 days. That's what you need to do. Srila Prabhupada mentions in the introduction of the Bhagavad Gita that when a prescription is given, you have to take it according to the prescription of the physician and not according to your own whim or instruction of a friend who is not a physician. So similarly, when we hear from a spiritual master, from a bona fide spiritual authority, then we follow it and implement that in our lives, and that's what gives us the advancement in spiritual life. So those were some of the points on the purport that I thought of sharing. I'll just read the translation once again so that we can meditate on the translation, and I'll open it up for any comments or any thoughts from the devotees. Maharaj Yudhishthira said, O best of the saints among the demigods, O best of spiritual leaders, how did Hiranyakashipu give so much trouble to Prahlad Maharaj, the pure and exalted saint? Although Prahlad was his own son, I wish to know the subject from you. So, as Srila Prabhupada concludes in the purport, he says, as stated in the Bhagavad Gita, Bhaktya Mam Abhijanati, one must try to understand Krishna by devotional service and from a devotee. Therefore, Yudhishthira Maharaj was quite right in wanting to learn further about Prahlad Maharaj from Sri Narada Muni. Thank you very much. Any thoughts or questions or comments from the assembled devotees? Yes, that's it, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Good morning. Nice to be able to hear from you this morning. I'm wondering, along the lines of the guru-disciple relationship, what is the role of the spiritual master for grihasthas, considering that grihasthas do have some independence, and what's the role of the living spiritual master, like, that differentiate from just being able to take the teachings from Prabhupada's books for the grihastha specifically?
So I will share what I've heard from my spiritual master on this topic, and also what I've gathered from Shastra. So the relationship of the spiritual master and the disciple is not dependent on the varnashrama situation of the disciple. There's no such reference in the Shastra that says that, at least I have not come across, that says that the spiritual master's relationship with a Brahmana devotee is different from a Kshatriya devotee, is different from a Vaishya devotee or a Shudra devotee. Right? Or similarly, and again, I'm talking about just varnashrama. Since your question was varnashrama, of course, we understand that, from the Shastra, that you cannot think of devotees in terms of varnas, or we cannot say this is a Shudra devotee. That's not the point I'm making. So I get that. My point is more related to varnashrama, the question that you're asking. So similarly, it's not like if you already a sannyasi, then you have the ability to disregard your spiritual master. Whereas if you're a grihastha, you can disregard to some extent. But if you're a brahmachari, you cannot disregard your spiritual master. There is no such distinction that's made in the Shastra. Sakshat Haritvena Samasta Shastra. The spiritual master is considered as Hari himself for a disciple. So the instructions of the spiritual master are applicable to all varnas and ashramas. So first of all, us thinking that because we are in a certain ashrama, right, the instructions of the spiritual master don't apply to us, or or applied to us in a different way is flawed. So the instructions of the guru are applicable to all varnas and ashramas equally. It's not that it varies based on, or you have the discretion to interpret the instruction of the guru based on your understanding of what ashrama you're in. That is not what the Shastra says. That's the first point. The second point is that the instructions of the spiritual master will always be appropriate to what the position of the disciple is in terms of how you can practice. Right? So the spiritual master's instructions come in two ways. And actually in many ways, but I'll just speak about two ways. One is the personal instructions that one may receive based on your ability to connect personally with the spiritual master and get some personal instructions. But what I've heard from my spiritual master, and I've heard this in Srila Prabhupada's lectures as well, is that the main instruction of the spiritual master comes in the Srimad Bhagavatam lectures and other instructions that are given by the spiritual master. And one of my senior god brothers, when I was first trying to practice spiritual life, told me that the spiritual master's instructions are all available in the Vani of the spiritual master. If one is desiring to ask a personal instruction from the spiritual master, then you're basically saying that, well, whatever you've said in the Srimad Bhagavatam and other teachings, that's for the public. I don't want that. I'm special, so I want something more special for me, right? And so that's what I was taught, that don't go and ask for specific instructions for yourself from the spiritual master. Try to understand the Vani of the spiritual master, because the instructions that are eternally applicable are given in the Srimad Bhagavatam class. Now, it does not mean that we should not take advantage of an opportunity to get clarifications, and all that we can still do. But the mood of understanding the mood of the spiritual master is from the teachings of the spiritual master. And so whether our spiritual master is personally present before us, in many cases, the spiritual master may not be present on the planet. In some cases, even if the spiritual master is present, we may not have so much access to directly go and ask questions of the spiritual master, which is in my scenario, I don't have like direct access to my spiritual master where I can, on a regular basis, on a daily basis, be able to consult. In that case, you take shelter of the instructions of the guru that come in the Srimad Bhagavatam class that the spiritual master provides. And the instructions are very clear. And this goes across the different spiritual masters within our movement, and then with Srila Prabhupada, that the main instruction is to practice Krishna consciousness as sincerely we can, to focus on chanting the holy name sincerely, not offending devotees, right? These are all very basic instructions. My spiritual master in one class said that the only simple instruction for devotees to progress in spiritual life is sincerely chant the holy name and don't offend devotees. And we can spend a lifetime just trying to follow this one instruction. Sincerely chant the holy name and don't offend devotees. So the instructions are all there. And Krishna has also given us intelligence. He says in the 10th chapter of the Gita, Dadami buddhi yogam tam. So as we try to become more and more sincere in our practice, Krishna will give us the intelligence to be able to understand the instructions of the spiritual master and how to apply them that are in sync with the mood of the spiritual master. So all the ingredients are available to us. So again, my main point is that the instructions of the spiritual master are not, otherwise there would be no public classes. If the spiritual master gives a public talk, there are sannyasis present, he may have sannyasi disciples present. So when Srila Prabhupada was giving lectures, his sannyasi disciples were present, his brahmachari disciples were present, his grihastha disciples were present, and also general public was present. When Srila Prabhupada said Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and our job should be to sincerely chant the holy name to connect with Krishna, that's not specifically meant for brahmacharis or grihasthas or sannyasis. It's meant for everybody. So again, the point that I am making again is that the instructions of the spiritual master are not ashrama specific. If anybody has a different point of view, please share. But this is what I've gathered and heard from my spiritual master and the Shastra. And I don't know if it answers your question, Dasi Prema Prabhu. Can everyone still hear me?
Yeah, no, yeah, that's good. I like that. Just that loyalty to the spiritual master is like it's a lifelong commitment, no matter what situation, what ashram you're in. But yeah, I guess maybe my question boils down to like, yeah, because that if we how to say, yeah, I guess what's anyways, I'll curb my question for now. But thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the insight you've given so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any comments at this point? Okay, in that case, we will end here. Granthra Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.